Hi, I'm Rick Kustich. I'm author of Advanced Fly Fishing for Great Lakes Steelhead and Hunting Musky on a Fly. And today I'm going to tie a couple of steelhead patterns that really are effective both in the Great Lakes and throughout the Pacific Northwest. The first one we're going to tie is really my go-to steelhead fly. It's a very simple pattern. It's going to be tied on a tube, which, as I'll explain as we go through, has some tactical advantages, as well as makes the fly a bit simpler to tie. But it's a very simple pattern, just going to incorporate some schlapin, some marabou, and a little bit of flash. And it's something that can be constructed in a small amount of time. It's a fly that maintains really good silhouette in the water and a lot of movement. So the marabou fingers, the fibers just undulate in the water, really look like a live bait fish as it kind of swims through. So very effective pattern. Let's take a look at how we're going to do it. We're going to tie this pattern. I mean, this can be tied on a shank. It can also be tied on directly on a hook, but I like to tie it on a tube, a hollow tube, plastic, flexible. How tubes, if you're not familiar with the tube fly, what that is we're going to tie, instead of tying on the shank of a hook, we're going to tie it on the tube. The tippet gets inserted through the tube, tied off to a short shank hook, and that's going to place that hook at the very rear of the materials. So one of the advantages, or a couple of the advantages of a tube fly, is it allows that hook to be placed at the very rear of the fly, so that when a fish, a lot of times steelhead, they'll take the fly right from the back. You'll feel them a lot of times just kind of pecking and pulling at the back of the fly. If you have that hook back there, you're going to hook more fish. And then also using a short shank hook as opposed to a longer shank hook, the shorter shanks gives the fish less leverage when it's fighting, less chance of it spitting the hook or having the hook come out of its mouth. So more hookups, higher landing percentage. That's kind of why I go with the tube fly. And that's a similar advantage of shanks as well. So to tie on a tube, it either requires a specific vise that's designed for tube fly tying, so it's just like has a chuck and a mandrel goes through the tube and it's inserted in that chuck, or they make an adapter for your standard vise that would allow you to tie tube flies. So I'm going to insert the mandrel.
3.
Okay, so we're going to start by inserting the mandrel into the chuck of the vise and tightening that down. And then that's going to, so the mandrel's metal, that gives us a nice secure and stable tying surface right there. So you can start this pattern actually with a dubbing if you'd like to add dubbing or add some other color. I generally, for quick, for just ease in tying and quickness, I generally just don't even use any dubbing, and just the materials of the schlapin and the marabou kind of cover over the tube and really are the predominant keys to the fly. So I'm going to start this back. So I got about an inch and a half behind the front of the tube. The one thing about a plastic tube like this is you don't really have to be quite as particular with where you start. I always allow myself to start further back, because you can always trim the front end of the tube without any problem. So we're going to start there. The first step is just to tie in a piece of schlapin. And schlapin is just a long feather. In this case, it's purple, and just have longer, stiffer fibers. What I want to do is peel off some of the end material. We're not going to use that fuzzy stuff at the end. And what this does really is provides a layer of stiffness under the fly, so that marabou has a tendency to kind of condense and crush down in the water when it gets wet. This will help keep that up and not condense down when it's swimming through the water, and allows the fly to have a much better silhouette.
So I'm going to tie this in at the tip and wrap forward, kind of stroking the fibers back. I don't want to stroke them back too much because, again, I want this to stay fairly straight up so that it allows the marabou to continue to be propped up. So just a pretty simple step here. Just wrapping this forward, one wrap in front of the next. Really not going to see this much, just going to be under the marabou feathers. And that's it for that. Secure that off, and you can see how that's sticking up. And again, as the marabou sweeps over that, it's going to keep it propped up. Give the fly a nice silhouette in the front. That's what I'm looking for, is just so that it looks like something substantial in the water. So the next thing we're going to do is just tie in a piece of marabou. And what I like to use for marabou is feathers that have pretty much half or a third of every marabou pack will have good feathers in it. Some of the others you'll just have to peel off and use them for woolly buggers. But what I'm looking for in a good marabou feather is one that has a very thin stem, thin at the butt section to tie in. And long fibers that are going to flow in the water. So I'm going to tie this in at the tip as well, and then I'll wrap that forward as well. Marabou can be a bit of a challenge to work with, especially if you're wrapping it on the thinner surface area of a hook. I think this is another advantage of tying on a shank, is it's a little wider, a little more surface area, so that when I'm wrapping, it makes it a bit easier to work with. So one wrap in front of the others. You want to be careful that you don't get some of the marabou fibers caught under the stem. So sometimes you got to pick it out a little bit. Needle or just your scissors can help pick that out. You may want to use a hackle pliers to allow yourself a little more room at the end. But again, just wrapping forward, making sure that nothing gets wrapped on one another. And I'm just tying that off. So that's the first layer. This is going to be a black over purple. Really my go-to color. And again, this particular fly, as simple as it is, it's been really one of my most effective in the Great Lakes and on the West Coast. And yeah, you can mix up the colors. I've done well with black over blue, purple over orange. So finding the right combination for your waters is, is all part of the fun of fly fishing and part of the experiment that goes into it. So this is a same thing, a black marabou feather. And I'm going to tie that in at the tip as well. Nice thin stem on this one. And when it gets a little unruly, you can just wet it down a little bit too. Take a little of the static electricity out of there. Usually just tie that back. Doesn't even have to cut it. And now we're going to wrap this forward. Again, just wrapping forward, being careful not to wrap the stem on the other fibers, picking it out when you do. Looks like a bit of a mess when you're tying it on there, but as long as you don't wrap the stem on the other fibers, it all seems to come out good in the end. And again, the thinner stem just allows you to make a smaller head at the end. It kind of allows that material to lay back well, and so I really like to try to pick out those thinner stems. It's not always going to be the case though. Sometimes you have to use some that have a little thicker stem to it, still can use it. They're just a little bit more difficult to work with. So at this point, you can comb that stuff out a little bit just to kind of get any snarls or any places where maybe the stem wrapped up a little bit on the material. Get rid of this one unruly piece there. Okay, now all I want to do is add a little flash to this. I've really found that just having a little bit of flash, I don't like having a lot of flash in my flies, but just adding a little bit really seems to make a difference. And especially when there's sunlight out, it just seems to catch that glint and can really get a fish interested and get it to chase your fly. So I'm just going to use some holographic flash. All I'm going to do is cut 3 full lengths of this on each side. I'm going to just tie it in at the middle. I found that that's the most durable way. Just tie it right in at the middle and then fold that back. So that's how it would look on the fly. I'm going to do it. I usually try to put the flash right so it's on the lateral line. Right on the lateral line of the fly. So pretty much the flash are going to be opposite each other on the body of the fly. Of the wraps, pull that back, wrap it down. At the end, I'll trim those back a little bit. I like having the flash so that it goes a little bit beyond the materials, but not too far beyond, so I'll trim those up and neaten them up in a minute. I'll neaten up this head here a little. Now at this point I could be done with this fly. Now a lot of times I do like to fish it unweighted. Especially I mainly spay cast with this fly, so spay casting with it is easier with an unweighted fly. So I can finish this off and use it that way. Or, and this is one of the advantages of tube flies, again, I think really helps with their versatility. I can also add a cone to the front of this tube fly. I could do this either at the vise or at, on the water. But let me slide the mandrel out for a second. But I can slide that cone on there and finish it off with a cone like that. And again, I can carry these cones with me and slide it on because they'll slide right up onto that knot. So I could finish it off that way, or if I want to make it more permanent, I can cut that cone use a lighter to flare that plastic. Once that dries up, that'll keep the cone right on in place, so you can make it more permanent.
Thanks for sitting in with us to tie a couple steelhead flies today. Most of these materials are available here at Chagrin River Outfitters, and also check out chagrinriveroutfitters.com. You can also check out my website at rickkustich.com or follow me on Instagram or Facebook at Rick Kustich. Thank you.